When you clicked on this video, you probably already think you know what I'm about to say, but I promise you, you're wrong, because this video is gonna have little to no complaints about the trims on Intimidator / Thunderstriker at Carowinds. One thing that you should know about me, if you don't know already, is that Diamondback at Kings Island is my favorite roller coaster of all time. I like Diamondback more than I like Steel Vengeance. Call me weird if you want, that's where my preferences lie. Trims aren't that big of a deal to me because Diamondback has a really noticeable trim on the third Camelback, right before the mid-course brake run on that attraction. So honestly, I could care less about the trims on Intimidator / Thunderstriker, which, by the way, let's get this out of the way right away. Intimidator is such a better name. Thunderstriker is a really big downgrade. It's also really weird because obviously before Intimidator was renamed, Carowinds opened Copperhead Strike, so I find it really weird that they use the same word, but instead of calling Intimidator Thunder Strike, they went with Thunder Striker, but that doesn't match with Copperhead Strike, because Copperhead Strike isn't Copperhead Striker. I feel like I would like the name better if it tied in with the existing Copperhead Strike name, so it's just kind of messy. It also doesn't roll off the tongue well. Like, Intimidator is a fantastic name for a B&M hypercoaster, and unlike Project 305 at King's Dominion, it seems like Thunderstriker is like the permanent retheme. When I went to Carowinds in 2024, they were really pushing Thunderstriker merch in their stores, so that's the permanent name. They have a logo. One thing that I do have to mention that I mentioned in a video when this news first released is the fact that Intimidator was recently repainted with its really bright and vibrant colors, like that match with the plaza that Intimidator used to have, but the new logo for Thunderstriker is like a darker red, so it completely contradicts the fresh paint on the ride, which I really don't like. Like, the color red on the Thunderstriker logo looks more like a maroon. Like, if you look at the Diamondback track, which also got a recent repaint, it feels like that color red matches better with that logo, which is a little silly. So they obviously didn't plan that out. I don't know why they didn't keep the same shade of red that Intimidator has. I don't know if it was a licensing issue or what, but I don't like how it contradicts itself. But that's a total nitpick. The plaza was pretty much just stripped down to bare bones. Like, all of the theming elements are there, but all of the mentions of Intimidator are gone, so it's just kind of generic right now. So I hope that Carowinds like spruces this section up in the next couple years, because Intimidator was one of the best presented attractions at Carowinds before this retheme. So let's dig into this ride experience. As I mentioned, Diamondback is my favorite roller coaster of all time, and that is a B&M Hyper in the Cedar Fair chain, and Thunderstriker is a B&M Hyper in the Cedar Fair chain, so both of them have staggered seating and they're very much sister coasters. And as of the time of this recording, I have not ridden Behemoth at Canada's Wonderland, which is the final of the three Cedar Fair Hypers, B&M Hypers that is. So the main purpose of this video is to explain why Thunderstriker falls short of Diamondback, in my opinion at least. It seems that this roller coaster is one of the more controversial B&M Hypers. It feels like a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on it. Like, I've heard a lot of people rank it as one of the best B&M Hypers in the country, and I've heard a lot of people rank it as one of the weaker B&M Hypers in the country. And as someone who really loves Diamondback, I would have assumed that I would have ranked it as one of the best, but that's just not really the case. I have only been on 4 B&M Hypers. Obviously Diamondback, Thunderstriker, and the other 2 are Mako and Apollo's Chariot. And I'll tell you right now, before we dig into the layout, that I like Thunderstriker more than Apollo's Chariot, but I think Mako is better. So it ranks 3 out of 4 for my B&M Hypers. So the great thing about this ride model is that it has my favorite restraint of all time. I love my B&M clamshells. They're absolutely spectacular. They don't come down on you during the ride. Like, occasionally they might come down like 1 click, but it really takes like 0 effort to just hold it in place. And I never hold my hands up during valleys just because I put my hands up exclusively during airtime moments or waitlist moments. I just like having my arms down to feel the positive G-forces more. Like, I want to work with the attraction, not up against the attraction. So let's start things off with the drop on Thunderstriker. So the great thing about B&M Hyper drops is that they get steeper and steeper the further down you go, which means you get really awesome airtime, because as the drop gets steeper, you float further and further out of your seat before you pull out and and valley. So for that reason, the longer the drop, the better the airtime. According to RCDB, Thunderstriker is 232 feet tall and Diamondback is 230 feet tall. So on paper, the drop on Thunderstriker should be a little better than the drop on Diamondback, but in practice, that's just not the case. If you look at both of the attractions, on Diamondback, you drop all the way back down to ground level, and on Thunderstriker, you do not. It looks like the valley is about 10 feet above ground level. So for that reason, I believe the drop on Diamondback is steeper than the drop on Thunderstriker, but they are listed as the same drop angle, which I just don't believe. Just like look at the profiling of them. So for that reason, I think the drop on Diamondback is better than the drop on Thunderstriker. They're both very similar, and the drop on Thunderstriker is still really good, but it's just not as good as Diamondback. Both of these coasters, however, have a pretty shaky first valley, especially in the back. So the further back you go, the more shaky this moment will be, and this is by far the most shaky part of Thunderstriker. After that, this coaster turns into like Mako for a second, because this first element is not a camelback. It is like a twisted hill. It's kind of a turnaround. It's like an L turnaround. So out of the 4 B&M hypers that I've been on, this is most comparable to the first element on Mako, and the first element on Thunderstriker is much better than the first element on Mako, because the one on Thunderstriker is profiled to give airtime to the front row, which is really good. It's a really strong moment, but it does die out as soon as the train starts turning, which kind of reminds me of the third camelback on Mako, but that's on a much smaller scale than this element. In the back, you start getting weightlessness, and then it's killed immediately by the turn, so that's kind of a bummer. That being said though, the turn in the first half gives some nice laterals, and the second half, when you start banking to the left, you get some decent positive G's. That means that this element has a decent diversity of forces, especially when we dig into the camelbacks later in the attraction. It's kind of nice that this first element does have laterals and positive G's, because I would argue that the first valley and this left-hand turn banking down towards the ground are the most intense parts of Thunderstriker. I would say the turn more so than the valley. So that's really good. And then you're thrown into an absolutely massive camelback. This thing is really tall, and I just love the floaty feeling that you get on these B&M camelbacks. It's just magical, and this one is really tall, so you have some really cool visuals looking all the way down to the ground. It's just a euphoric experience, you know? Like, this is true for any B&M hyper, and that's even with the trim. Like, I don't mind the trim that much at all, because you still get some awesome airtime. Like, trims seem to ruin the ride for some people, but I think of it as more of like a really minor inconvenience. So it's really not that big of a deal. After that amazing camelback is my favorite turnaround on any B&M hyper that I have ridden. This weird looking turn thing has some really fun laterals, especially towards the back. It's kind of built like a figure 8, except the bottom half of the 8 is like 2 parallel lines that make up the out and back portion of the layout. So it's just really fun coasting through there. As I mentioned, this is probably the best moment of laterals on the attraction. And it's way more fun than the turnaround on Diamondback and Mako, in my opinion. And Apollo's Chariot doesn't have a traditional turnaround, so I'm just not going to mention that. On the return section, you have 2 camelbacks back to back. The first one does have a trim, the second one does not. As I mentioned, trims aren't that big of a deal to me. That being said though, the second camelback on Thunderstriker is probably the weakest of the big 3. But it's still an awesome moment, don't get me wrong. You still get the same euphoric floating sensation that you get on the big camelback on the outbound section. So it still fulfills its purpose. It's still really nice. It's really fun. I kind of glossed over it, but in the front row, you get airtime cresting into all 3 of these camelbacks. Like the 2 hills that have a trim, you'll start floating up after you pass over the trim. And then you don't quite land in your seat after you crest the hill, but you get like this weird sensation where you haven't fully returned to your seat yet, but the force that was pushing you up is gone. So you're just kind of like sitting there, but you're not all the way back down in your seat. And that's the case for all 3 of those hills in the front row. So that's really unique. The first element in the front row, you don't get that sensation because the turn like kills that that feeling. So after those 2 returning hills, you're gonna crest up into the mid-course brake run. You don't get any airtime coming up into it in the front because it's a twisted rise. You curve up into it. It's not like a traditional hill. And then the second half of Thunder Striker is pretty simple. You just drop off the mid-course brake run. You curve up into a downward helix, and then the helix pulls you back up. You have one more dip, and then you hit the final brake run. So in the back row, you get decent airtime dropping off the mid-course brake run and dropping out of the helix. And in the front row, you get like no airtime cresting into the helix, but you do get one final decent pop cresting into the final brake run. And as for the helix itself, it's not that forceful, and there's not really any laterals. It's just kind of fun and graceful. And that is your Thunder Striker ride experience. When you hit the brake run, there's going to be like a ton of hairbands on the ceiling for the transfer track, so that's pretty funny. It was like an ocean of them. It was crazy how many of them there were. I got to ride Diamondback like a month after I rode Thunder Striker, and there weren't even half as many hairbands on Diamondback's roof compared to Thunder Striker's, which is just kind of funny in my opinion. I don't know if that's because Kings Island cleans their stuff more or what, but it's kind of a cool thing, you know. That reminds me of Expedition Everest, that first scene with the broken track. There's always a bunch of hairbands up there, which is kind of fun. So overall, I feel like the airtime moments on Diamondback are much stronger. And I don't even think that is because of the trims. Like, I would take the trimmed hill on Diamondback over the second trimmed hill on Thunder Striker. Like, there's no way to prove to you that the airtime moments on Diamondback are stronger than the airtime moments on Thunder Striker, so you just have to go out and ride them yourself. But one thing that I can prove to you is that Diamondback has more airtime moments. So by my count, Diamondback has 8. Obviously the first drop, then you have 2 Camelbacks right after that. You have the trimmed hill in the back row. You have an airtime moment dropping off the mid-course brake run, and then you got 2 more hills, and then the drop into the splashdown. So that is 8. And in the back row of Thunder Striker, you have the first drop, the first Camelback, the back-to-back Camelbacks on the return trip, the drop off the mid-course brake run, and the drop off the helix. And there's the same number of airtime moments in the front row, but we're gonna switch out the drop off the mid-course brake run for the first element. So in terms of a ride experience, 8 airtime moments is definitely more fulfilling than 6. And you throw on top of that all 8 of those are stronger than the 6 on Thunder Striker, and Diamondback's just in a different league, even though they're literally sister coasters. Plus, I have to mention the placement of the mid-course brake run. Diamondback is much more centralized, so that you have 4 airtime moments before the mid-course brake run, and you have 4 after the mid-course brake run. On Thunder Striker, in the back row, you have 4 before the mid-course brake run, and 2 after the mid-course brake run. But the 4 before the mid-course brake run are way stronger than the final 2. And I would say that's not the case on Diamondback, because the drop into the splashdown is one of the strongest airtime moments on that attraction, in my opinion. That seems to be an unpopular opinion, but that's an awesome element that gets really overlooked. So despite all of my complaining, Thunder Striker is absolutely my type of ride. I love B&M Hypers, and even though it doesn't reach the heights of my favorite roller coaster of all time, it's still an awesome roller coaster. I can't stress that enough. Another disadvantage that Thunder Striker is fighting against is the fact that it is in the same park as Fury 325, which is highly regarded as one of the best roller coasters in the world, and it's the same ride model. So Thunder Striker is literally overshadowed by its neighbor across the park. Kings Island also has a B&M Giga Coaster, but Orion just doesn't get the same amount of praise that Fury does, so I feel like Diamondback is still able to shine through. So I love all 4 of these attractions, but today we're highlighting Thunder Striker, and that it's a really complete ride experience. I still really like it. I made a video a while ago praising Copperhead Strike, and as much praise as I gave that attraction, I'd still rank Thunder Striker ahead of it, because this ride just caters to me. You know, these floater airtime machines are my type of ride. You know, these are the coasters that I absolutely love. So Carowinds just has an incredible top 3, with Fury, which is one of the best coasters in the world, Thunder Striker, which is an amazing floaty airtime machine that I absolutely adore, and you have an incredibly underrated launch coaster with Copperhead Strike, plus you throw in Afterburn, which is an incredibly solid B&M invert, and this park has a loaded top 4. So I really like Thunder Striker. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this roller coaster because it does seem to be pretty polarizing. Do you fall on the end that really likes it? Do you fall on the end of the spectrum that doesn't really like it that much? Please let me know in the comments below. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.